Welcome to Let's Thrive Postpartum.
Hey, Mom, welcome back. I'm Kelly.
And I'm Ashley. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about postpartum anxiety. And you guys are going to get to hear my story of working through postpartum anxiety, mostly with my first, but then still how it came up with the birth of my second child as well.
Can't wait to
Um,
hear.
It was an interesting experience. So yeah, let's see. I'll start back at the beginning. I actually was very fortunate to have a wonderful pregnancy. I felt great. My skin looked amazing. My hair seemed, just to be doing these wonderful flowy things all the time. And life was pretty good. And it was kind of everything was going along, meeting the expectations that I had kind of hoped for, which is a good feeling. And I'm so fortunate that I had that experience. And I think it also set me up for having some perhaps unrealistic expectations of what life was going to look like after my son was born. And I was one of those who had done tons of babysitting,
Mhm.
classic oldest daughter. We've all seen those memes and things on TikTok recently, and just felt like, yeah, this is gonna be just easy, fine, normal. And it was not. I had already had anxiety and experienced anxiety for a little while in college, and had recognized that about myself and had thought through. I got pregnant while I was at the very end of grad school to become a therapist. I'm a therapist, by the way. And so kind of top of mind, okay, I know that I've experienced anxiety, I've been managing it, have some anxious tendencies, probably need to keep an eye out for if this seems to get any worse, like after the baby's born. And so was kind of thinking through it, I thought a little bit. And so my son was born, his birth was fairly, you know, average for normal
Mhm.
birth, 15-hour labor. They did end up having to do some different medications to stop my labor, then restart my labor.
Hmm.
My heart rate was doing some strange things. His heart rate was doing some strange things. So I don't remember much of it. My husband will say he was kind of scared for a little while because we didn't know what was happening. Nobody was doing a great job explaining. So that was kind of first, I think, experience for me of like, oh, okay, not what I thought, not what I was
Mhm.
expecting. And that kind of creates fear. And so that was hard. But once he was born, he was healthy. We come home. And I think for me, within the first couple of days, I started noticing that he was born in December. So it gets dark at like 4:45.
Mhm.
And I started noticing every time it would get dark, I could not eat. Like I just had this panic, overwhelming sense of dread. For anyone who's experienced anxiety, you know what it feels like. And I couldn't eat, and I really couldn't move around. Like I wanted to just sit in one place and hold him, or I don't know. And I just remember this kind of frozen, immobile feeling. And it would happen when it would get dark, like every day. And I remember telling my husband, because he finally was like, "Are you okay? What's going on?" And I was like, "I don't want to talk about it." So, which, hello,
Yeah.
therapist, red flag, okay. And it was just this awful feeling. I remember texting friends and trying to say like, I'm feeling really nervous. I'm not sleeping a whole lot. I'm staring at him and his bassinet. And a lot of people were like, yeah, like that kind of happened. That was me too. And then finally, my husband and I were talking, and I was like, I cannot sleep. Like I cannot fall asleep. Some intrusive thoughts started coming in of like, I know that if I close my eyes, he's just going to stop breathing. Like I know that if I'm not looking at him, he's going to stop breathing. which in hindsight, you think back and you're like, well, that's absolutely makes no sense. But that is how it felt in the moment. And so, yeah, like I would lay there and just like, and look at him. My husband finally, he was like, look, we need to get some distance. Let's move the bassinet across the room. The monitor will still be looking right down on him, but like, let's move the bassinet away a little bit and see if that helps. It did a little bit. And, he would start doing some of the night feedings, trying to help me get more sleep, which it wasn't working. My son also wasn't the best sleeper as an infant. There was lots of bouncing like in a dark closet on my yoga ball, trying to soothe him at 2 o'clock in the morning. And finally one night, my husband, after I woke up one day and I was so tired that I was nauseous. Kelly, I don't know if you know that feeling, like where you're like, you feel like you're going to throw up because you're so tired.
But then
And
you also can't sleep when you close your eyes and lay down to
yeah,
sleep.
yeah. And my husband finally said, all right, that's it. Like, you need go to the guest room, put on my noise canceling headphones, blast your favorite Enya music or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm taking the monitor, but I want you to be like not able to hear anything. That was really triggering for me. His crying would send me into a spiral. And so I knew if I could hear him crying, I cannot sleep. If a monitor is next to me, like I cannot sleep because I was just anticipating the cry. And he did that. And one night of me actually getting like a solid, I don't, maybe 6 or 7 hours of sleep.
Which is life-changing at that point.
It was life-changing. And I woke up and I remember my husband was in the military and he was like, sleep deprivation is a tactic that they use for like when you're for interrogation and stuff like that, because it wears you down. And he was like, I don't know that I've ever even been this tired, like even through basic training and like all the things like, and that's when I remember thinking, oh my gosh, okay, this is really important. We went, all the pediatrician visits. I remember at one visit, I filled out the Edinburgh like scales, gave it to the pediatrician. She looked back at me and she said, some of these are a little concerning. And I said, I realize that now. I realize that now. And she was like, are you going to reach out and talk to somebody? I said, yeah, I'm seeing my doctor. This was getting into up close to that 6-week mark. I was like, I'm going to see my doctor soon and I'm going to talk to her about it. And then the next visit, because you go so many times when they're first born, the next visit, I was having such a hard time breastfeeding. That was the whole feeding process was like contributing. My anxiety was spiraling because I was just convinced he wasn't getting enough food. And it hurt. I just like, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was in that place of like, I can't ask for help. I've gotten really good at asking for help, by the way. So even hearing me say this, I'm like, who are you? Why? Like, who is that person? And the pediatrician looked at me and she was like, have you just ever given him a bottle of formula? And I was like, no. She goes, I'm giving you a can. I want you to make a bottle and give the baby a bottle. Be happy that he's fed. And if you don't want to breastfeed anymore, please stop. Because the most important thing is that you are happy and that you are feeling your best. And I broke down and started crying in this poor pediatrician's office. And I was like, oh my God, thank you so much for saying this to me. Again, like no one was pressuring me. This was so much this like internal dialogue and all the shoulds of what I should be doing or should be trying, that I was just so stuck in.
Start moving him to formula?
Yeah, that day I switched him to formula. I walked out. I like walked down the street. We were in like Old Town Alexandria at the time. I walked down the street to the grocery store, the CVS, and I bought some formula and I was like, that's it. I couldn't do this anymore.
How did that impact your mental health?
It was huge.
Good.
It was huge. I don't think I realized how much the stress of trying and, what I felt like failing to breastfeed, the pain, the difficulty, the frustration of like trying to figure out the timing, the engorgement. I mean, there was so much about breastfeeding. I realized I didn't have a clue. And once I was able to say, I don't have to do this anymore, that gave me, it felt like a huge weight was taken off of my shoulders. And that happened pretty early on. Like that was like week 4. And so that provided some relief, but a lot of my anxiety was, I mean, it was still like so present. So at my 6-week appointment with my OB, she said I had my son in the stroller right there next to me, and she goes, "Well, how are things going?" Again, total sobbing. And she looked at me. This was the doctor that had delivered the baby. I knew
Mhm.
her pretty well. And she looked and kind of nodded. And I wish I could remember exactly what it was that she said, but it was something on the lines of, the transition to motherhood seems to be like super smooth for some. And if it's not, there's Lexapro. And she said it so just kind of like nonchalantly that I was like, "Oh, oh, okay." She goes, "Yeah, we're gonna start you on some medicine to help with your anxiety, and it's okay. Like, here you go. Here's the prescription. Let me know if you need anything." And I think again, I had this like internal dialogue or story of like, what are people going to think about me having to take medicine like after when I'm supposed to be in this like most joyous period of my life. And so I had a lot of this kind of shame and I don't
Mhm.
know, frustration and just I don't the internal dialogue with myself was not it was not very healthy. It was not very helpful, even though I did have these various outside people saying like, "It's good. Like let's try this. Just give him a bottle." Like all these things who afterwards I was like, "Oh, okay. This is this is good." So yeah, I mean, started on the medication. Once that kicked in, really, really, really helped with a
Good.
lot of my anxiety symptoms. We were moving at the time, which I was really excited about. We had, into a new house that we were thrilled about, and I was getting ready to go back to work, which for me, like it was for you, going back to work was a game changer. Just being around adults again, it was such a big deal for me to feel like I had that piece of my life back. And yeah, my relationship with anxiety, I always say, still a work in progress, but it gave me these insights that I didn't know that I needed, so that when I got pregnant again, I was like, "Okay, this is gonna be we've gotta get a plan in place." And
So
I'll
what
be
did you
honest,
do
I
for
would
that second one?
yeah.
Yeah, what did you do to make it different? Because that would be hard
So
to go back and say, "Let's do this again," having really
yeah,
struggled the first one without something different in your mind.
yeah. I was scared. I was scared that I was gonna experience that same level of anxiety again. And I think it shows I came out of it so much. My kids are 3 years apart. That I did finally get to a point that I said, "Okay, I think I can do this again. Like, I think we can." And then once I was pregnant, I was like, "Okay, we've got to get a plan in place because now I'm scared that this could happen again." So, I talked with my doctor like early on and said, "Hey, I had really horrible anxiety after the birth of my son. I want to talk about the medication options. What does that look like?" She did a really great job explaining there's options of medication while you're pregnant, there's options of medication after you give birth. There's various things that are safe for pregnancy, safe for breastfeeding. Like she did a really good job giving me the a good just level of information so that I could make a choice about what was
Nice.
going to be
Good.
best for us. And so we decided that I would start medication after he was born, but literally right after he was born. So in the hospital. And so that was in place. Like I knew that it was already, my husband knew we were going to do that. I had also talked with my husband about, "Hey, this is, you know me, you know that if I start shutting down, if I seem closed off, if I'm not eating, if I am saying I don't want to talk about it, if I was like, you know me, I need you to ask me. I need you to say, are you feeling okay? Are you feeling anxious? Do you need the help? Because I told him, I said, I'll be honest, I'm not going to volunteer the information.
But you knew
I'm
that about
not,
yourself this time.
I knew that about myself. Yeah. So even though I know that I'm not great in those moments of advocating for myself, I can advocate for myself by letting my support circle know, hey, here's what I need you to say to me. And I'll be honest. I'll be honest with you, but I need you to ask me about it.
You got to take the
Um,
first, they have to take the first step.
yeah. Yeah. And I also decided with the second one, I was going to spend a lot more time just laying in bed, laying with her, not trying to do laundry, not trying to like get outside and go on walks right away or do too much. We had lots of meals that were, prepared and like ready to go. And I tried to have this mini version of that lying in period that is a common practice in many other countries that I wish they did more of here in the United States.
Right.
But yeah, we set up like her sleeping arrangements were different. Like it was like right beside me. I just laid in bed. I watched a lot of TV. I did tons of skin to skin with her. And I had pre-booked appointments with lactation consultants and other like support people because I did want to try and breastfeed. And I kind of had it all in place before she was born. And it made so much of a difference. I remember the medication takes a while to kick in, so I had a couple days like postpartum where I remembered saying like telling my husband my anxiety's through the roof, but I realized that for and it's not for whatever reason, it's backed by lots of research, skin to skin with my daughter completely calmed my nervous system. And so I would just lay there for hours and she would lay on my chest and we just laid there. And I wasn't trying to do anything else other than that. And then it's kind of like it started to pass. And it was a completely different experience. I had a better success with breastfeeding. And was able to I wasn't going back to work at the time. So it was different, but it was different because I had planned.
Let me ask this because at the
Yeah.
beginning you said something really interesting about when you had your first child, the expectations you had in your head of what this was
Mhm.
going to be like was very different than reality. How did
Yeah.
that play into anxiety? And then how did that your expectations change for your second child?
Yeah. So hugely so. I know for myself and probably for a lot of other people that have anxiety, I put lots of pressure on myself, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
think that you're going to do things the way that I don't know, see in the movies. And we've talked about this before, Kelly, like where did that
Mm-hmm.
expectation come from? Like what created this image of motherhood? And it's people we see, yes, of course, like friends, our own family and that kind of thing, but it's also movies and social
Social
media and all
media.
these
Yeah.
things. And so I just had this like my little rose colored glasses on thinking it was going to be great. And when it wasn't, the story I told myself is like, well, there must be something wrong with you, right? Like you're not doing something right, and that can cause a lot of anxiety and worry and frustration because I have this whole story that I'm telling myself that it's my fault
And you're
or
failing
that
as a mom at that
that
point.
I'm failing. I'm not doing it right. And
Even
so
though,
yeah,
as a mental health therapist, somebody who is certified, you know that that expectation probably is not reality going
yeah,
into it.
yep, yep. I know. And I was fresh out of grad school. So, this really all should have been top of mind. And it wasn't because it's just so all consuming.
It is all consuming.
Yeah.
And if you can get it and go through those struggles, coming right
Yep.
out of becoming a therapist, everybody else, it also makes sense can have those same struggles who don't have that background and can easily identify these are red flags. These are things I
Hmm.
should be paying attention to. where even though it's all consuming, you have a little bit better knowledge than some of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And so going into it with my daughter, I actually had the expectation, okay, this could happen again. Like
Yeah.
you could feel the same level of anxiety. So, what are you going to do about it? Like, what can we do to mitigate it? And like, what can we do to help move through it in a much healthier, more supportive way? And so, with the second one, I would say it almost like I wouldn't say I lowered my expectations. I think my expectations were just more grounded in reality. And then my experience kind of it matched it, and in some ways surpassed it, like because things did go much better in those initial weeks, which was wonderful.
Was
And
crying, so you said your first crying was a trigger for you when you would hear him
Mhm.
cry, it would set it off. Was that the same reaction that you had with your second?
No, it wasn't. And I don't know if it was, I'm taking care of an older child and a
Mm-hmm.
baby. And so my focus was on two. So it kind of like I don't have all of my focus going into like this one, like
That's a
one
great
child.
point.
But I think with her later, the feeding and stuff became another trigger in its own way. Making sure she's like getting enough to eat. Her kind of, the growth curve started going down a little bit. And then that was, its own journey more at like the 6 month mark, where I experienced another huge spike in anxiety when we were trying to figure out switching to a bottle. She was refusing to take a bottle. I bought all the cups, every single cup that exists, every single bottle that exists,
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out. I later learned in other countries, there are not nearly as many options.
Which would
And
be great.
that's great. It's great when you go into a store and they're like, these are the two bottles, and that's it. There's not 500. So,
We have every bottle you can imagine. Same.
yeah. Yeah. But I mean, through the experience though, I learned a lot about myself. I learned how to recognize what anxiety looks like and feels like for me,
Mm-hmm.
which is so important because when I can recognize it, I become aware of it, then I can figure out what I need to do about it. And I think before, and even back just thinking my younger self, I don't think I had that level of awareness of like what it feels like and how to recognize it really early on to say, okay, this is not like, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right. We need to make a plan. And so that is what, going into the second pregnancy and even now, my kids are 5 and 2. Even now, if I start having like some of these, like my symptoms of anxiety are often a lot of like related to sleep, lots of racing thoughts, kind of worst case scenario kinds of things. And if it starts to happen, I know like I do a lot of mindfulness and breathing and that kind of thing. And I really lean into that, and then it passes. And so I think that was something so important for me, is just learning how it feels in my body and what to
Mm-hmm.
do about it. Um, yeah.
But that's great that you now have that. You now have said this is a trigger. I feel this way. I've got tools that I can use, mindfulness,
Mhm.
meditation, things that are going to help bring me back so it doesn't continue to spiral out of control.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really informed, my work as a therapist. I worked at a school for a number of years, and that was where I worked when I had both of my kids. And transitioning into private practice, really decided like I want to work with postpartum moms and families just to help them feel better, help them navigate through all of this. And especially even when I'm working with families, is talking about, how to create a healthy family dynamic, and how for parents, how your mental health often can become your kids' mental health and affects them. And it's been a big driving factor for what I'm doing in my work now. And I love what I do. And it's just, I can't imagine really doing anything else.
I love that you can use the experience and what you went through to help other parents
Hmm.
not suffer as much and really
Yeah.
understand and improve their family outcomes.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you said too, Kelly, is so much of it is the education piece of it is, reducing the stigma through education, through telling people like how frequently this happens and how many moms go through this. And I forgot to ask you this question. Did any of your friends have a really good understanding or idea of what you were going through?
No. One,
Yeah.
it was COVID, so we didn't see a lot of people. So I think if
Hmm.
you saw me, it would have been very evident. But I also didn't know how to say, here's what I'm feeling and what I'm
Yeah.
struggling with. So
Yeah.
I didn't share a lot. I also don't know that I had an immediately close friend who had experienced something similar
Yeah.
to kind of be checking on the mental health
Hmm.
part of it. But that was 100% on me. I kept my mouth shut and isolated and did
Yeah.
everything I probably shouldn't have done. But the
Yeah.
education piece that you're talking about, learning, here's things that will help you, is so key in stopping that.
Yeah. I think that's why conversations like this are so important because again, I didn't really say anything to anybody. And if you kind of think about most women probably have several people they would consider close friends and good
Mm-hmm,
friends.
mm-hmm.
And we all know that we're not talking to each other about it. And and it's hard to talk to your doctor about it. And so hearing conversations like this and just getting more information out there and trying to normalize it is so, so important.
It is, but I want to come back to something you said at the very beginning. In
Yeah.
your experience, when you went to your pediatrician for your first child's checkups and you did the Edinburgh Depression Scale, they
Hmm.
talked to you about your results. I didn't know
One
that
did.
experience. Never.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
maybe I hope I'm not saying anything wrong because it's some parts of it are a blur. But you take it 500 times. Every time you
Uh-huh.
go for a first year, you do it. I
Yeah.
don't know that I ever had a single person talk to me about my results. And I know my results weren't great, but I also know I probably lied a little bit because I wanted to look better than I felt.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
never put like the 100% truth, but it was a good
Yep.
80% truth. And I should have been a
Yeah.
flag. I don't remember anybody ever talking to me about
Yeah.
in South Carolina. They're not required to. They're required to give it to you, but not really talk to you about it. And maybe I just fell through the cracks in certain situations. But I
Yeah.
love that at least you had a
Mhm.
discussion and somebody in Virginia was saying, this is a little worrisome. That
Yeah.
gives me hope.
I hear that from so many friends who they're like, yeah, I fill this thing out. I was actually honest. Maybe the first time they're like, I was actually honest. And nobody said anything and nobody asked about it. Which itself is really hard because it takes a lot being vulnerable
It does.
on that form when you are in a pediatrician office where they're examining your baby and now they're kind of evaluating you is what it feels like,
It does. And it's probably
you
also not
know?
their specialty, right? They went
Yeah.
to medical school for children,
Yeah.
not mother's mental health,
Yeah.
but you are vulnerable and you're saying, I kind of need help.
Yeah. And then no one says anything. And that's really hard.
It
So
is.
yeah, I did have this one pediatrician that said, I remember she like looked at it and was like, this is a little concerning. I said, I know, I work in mental health.
That gives me so much hope that there are people out there
Yeah.
who do look at it.
Yeah, I know. It's just interesting. I think I interview everywhere I go now. Anyone who touches the world of maternal mental health, or working with babies and that kind of thing, I'm always like, how do you do this? What does this look like in your practice? What kind of questions do you ask? And it's been interesting just hearing the responses, but everyone seems to agree there is so much more work to be done in this field that people are trying, right? They're working on it.
Mhm.
People like you, people like me, but there's still so much more to do.
There is, but I feel like if we're starting somewhere, it can only get better
Hmm.
and more normal. And if that's even the thing that we can get from
Yeah.
this, is that it's normal.
Yeah.
And people just
Yep.
don't talk about it. It reminds me back in the 80s before Susan G. Komen passed away and her sister
Yep.
started the nonprofit, you didn't talk about breast cancer. It was very taboo. It was very hushed. It was very shameful. And
Yeah.
then when they started that nonprofit and it really went to the marketing side of let's normalize this, we should be supporting women, your
Mm-hmm.
perception of breast cancer and being a survivor and that what happens to families and the female all changed drastically. And I know it's a huge way down vision, but
Yeah.
if that became something for mental health, motherhood,
Yeah.
depression, all of that, where people were saying, this is real, this is
Mm-hmm.
impactful, it is not shameful, and it's something we should be celebrate when you get through it because it's
Yeah.
very normal, more normal than breast cancer. So that
Yeah.
is kind of one day that
Yeah.
people could say, I survived that and it wasn't
Yeah.
shameful would be amazing.
Yeah. It's very, so much of it is treatable, right? Like with the right
100%.
supports and whatever that support looks like for an individual person, it is very treatable. And so we hope that, I think, through this podcast and the work that you're doing is trying to reach as many people as possible to share the stories, get the word out there, and have some real talk about the not so pretty parts of motherhood, because there's lots of pretty,
Not pretty parts.
lots of not pretty parts that, but people don't tend to focus on those.
It's the best of the best and the weirdest of the weirdest all in one
Yep.
time. So, Ashley, thank you for sharing this and getting vulnerable
Yes.
and kind of walking through what happened. Is there anything that you didn't ask or what you kind of learned that you would want someone to know from your
Yeah.
experience?
I think learning for me, what I would wish for other moms to know is honest communication with your partner or support network or whoever it is for you, is just talking ahead of time and saying, this is what I want you to ask. This is how I want you to check in with me. And whatever, it could be different for everybody, but what do you need to be honest with one person about how you're actually feeling? And, again, it can be anyone, but like thinking through, what do you need to be honest with just one person? And when you're honest with them, then you're able to make a plan about how to get more help.
Is there anything? So, you mentioned from the honesty side, telling your
Mhm.
husband, I need you to ask me this. I need you to make the
Yeah.
first step when you notice this. Is there anything else that helped you be honest with him or another support person?
I think I think really just having him ask me.
But you knew I
Just
can't make the first step. I need you
yeah,
to make the first step.
yeah. Like I will be honest with him, but I needed him to make the first step and to be the person to ask me and just check in on a regular basis. How are you feeling today? You feeling okay? Do you need to go outside? Do you want to go on a walk? Do you want me to
What was
hold the
a
baby for a
regular
while?
basis? Was that once a day? Did he check in once a week? Did you have him check in
Couple
like
times
every?
a day.
Okay.
Couple times a day. you know? And yeah, because I would tell him, hey, like if it's too much, I'll say, look, okay, you've asked me 5 times today. I'm good. Today's good. But I told him to ask me like multiple times a day, just and especially in the first week postpartum. How are you
Mhm.
feeling? Is there anything you need? What's going on? And it was just so helpful because then I could say like, I'm actually right now I'm really not feeling great. Okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to hold the baby? Do you want to go on a walk? I love being outside. Being outside is like my ugh it just
It
helps me
just
feel
saves.
better all the time.
For your mental health,
And
it's so great.
it's so great. It's so important. And so yeah, just figuring out how to be honest with one person and having somebody intentionally asking, "How are you?"
Mm.
And it feels good. Lots of people ask about the baby. Not a lot of people ask about the mom.
Yes, the things I wish I knew when I had friends having babies.
Yeah,
Ask about the mom.
same, same.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing this. I think that's a huge takeaway for all of us listening is how do you start to recognize what this feels like in you?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you start working on having that open, honest communication with one person? Step
Yeah.
one of saying, I need help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ashley, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you guys for listening. We will see you back here next week as we keep going forward with other stories and tips and ways you can kind of start preparing and helping support your mental health as you're going through postpartum depression and anxiety. Hope you have a great week.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please be sure to hit subscribe, leave us your feedback, and give us a 5-star review. For even more support, visit us at wethrivepostpartum.com/podcast to sign up for our newsletter and learn more about our community. Remember, you are not alone. With support, you can feel better. Together, let's thrive postpartum.